Hurricane Irma, Florida braces as deadly storm prepares to hit. Hurricane Irma is beginning to unleash on Florida, leaving millions of evacuated residents dreading returning to their vulnerable homes. The first hurricane-force wind gusts have been recorded in the Florida Keys, and at least one tornado has been whipped up by Irma's force. Florida Governor Rick Scott earlier announced the storm is here as the outer bands of Hurricane Irma start to lash the state's southern tip, and warned our state has never seen anything like it. Governor Scott said time is fast running out for 6.3 million Americans ordered to flee Hurricane Irma, and warned them to take shelter immediately or you will not survive. He says the massive storm is likely to cause widespread damage and that people should stay away until they are told by local officials that they can return. Florida resident Ashley Winnie, who lives in the northern city of Jacksonville, told News.com she feared she may not have a home to go back to. The storm hit Florida starting on Sunday, so folks really need to leave now. Other northern counties in Florida are issuing evacuations today. Leaving sucks. Trying to pack everything you need, important documents, any personal items, etc., in a short amount of time isn't fun, she said. No one wants to leave their home. I dread going back to Florida and taking in the damage. I hope I have a home to go back to. Ms. Winnie said she wanted to stay in her home to ride out the storm and say I lived through Irma. Then I actually looked at my house and realized a tree could fall on my bedroom while I slept and I would be helpless, she said. The National Weather Service in Miami said a tornado had touched the ground in Fort Lauderdale, warning residents of South Florida. The weather phenomenon is a sometimes forgotten threat caused by hurricanes, which can spin up funnel clouds to cause destructive tornadoes. Winds up to 119 kilometers per hour have been recorded, while the center of Irma has sustained winds of 193 kilometers per hour as it heads towards Florida Keys. Tornado warnings have been issued for Fort Lauderdale, Coral Spring, Pompano Beach in Sunrise and Broward County, as well as parts of nearby Palm Beach. If you have been ordered to evacuate, leave now, not tonight, not in an hour, now, Governor Scott told residents. This is a deadly storm and our state has never seen anything like it. He said about 50,000 Floridians have taken shelter so far and there are more than 76,000 people currently without power, and it's going to get worse. The warning came as Irma shifted its deadly course toward Florida's west coast. President Donald Trump held a cabinet meeting to discuss Hurricane Irma at Camp David Presidential Retreat on Saturday afternoon. Trump posted a brief video from the meeting to his Twitter, sending his prayers to the people who have already been affected by the hurricane and speaking about the emergency measures that have been put in place. All of America grieves for those who have already lost their lives. We have had many lives lost already from Hurricane Irma and it hasn't even hit shore, he said as he addressed the cabinet. He urged residents in the impending storm's path to get out of its way. This is a storm of enormous destructive power and I ask everyone in the storm path to heed all instructions, he said. Property is replaceable but lives are not, and safety has to come first. Early forecasts had Hurricane Irma striking Florida's southeast capital of Miami hardest, but overnight the storm moved slightly west and is now forecast to strike Florida's west coast, with Tampa and Fort Myers bearing the brunt before Irma powers inland. Tampa's Mayor Bob Buckhorn said overnight, "It is not looking good for us." Florida Governor Scott imposed a curfew of between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. in Miami to stop opportunistic looters taking advantage of abandoned homes and shops. Irma has been downgraded to a Category 3 hurricane, but its path over warm waters may allow it to strengthen back to a Category 4 before it is expected to make landfall early on Sunday morning, 6 a.m. local time/8 p.m. Sunday Est. Even before the hurricane strikes, huge storm surges of up to 3.6 meters are predicted to overwhelm hundreds of kilometers of coastline home to 6 million people. Many businesses in Orlando were closed, with owners working to put up plywood and storm shutters. Miami consultant Nina Cohen said she didn't hesitate to evacuate her Coral Gables home when Irma started churning. She and thousands of other Miami residents had headed north to pack Orlando's hotels. "I haven't seen anything like this, and I have lived in Florida 40 years, said Ms. Cohen, who had to rebuild her home after Hurricane Andrew in 1992. "We all went through Andrew, lost homes, and this is looking worse than Andrew ever did. Ms. Cohen's friend Shirley Crane and her husband Beau traveled north with her and yesterday said they hoped it wasn't a decision they would regret. It's hard to know the right thing to do, but we didn't feel safe in Miami, Mrs. Crane said. But ask us next Wednesday if it was the right call, then we'll know for sure. Irma hit Cuba late on Friday as a Category 5 hurricane, its violent gusts destroying the instrument used to measure wind strength, Cuba's meteorological agency reported. At least 25 people were killed even before Irma hit Cuba, leaving entire islands in ruins. And a new danger lays on the horizon to the east. Hurricane Jose, a Category 4 storm with 150 miles per hour, 241 kilometers per hour, winds that could punish some of the devastated areas all over again this weekend. Also, the governor of the Mexican Gulf Coast state of Veracruz reported 2 deaths related to the arrival of Hurricane Katia, which has since been downgraded to a tropical storm. Governor Miguel Angel Yun says the 2 died in a mudslide in a country still reeling from the strongest earthquake to hit Mexico in a century, which killed at least 61 people. In one of the largest mass evacuations ever undertaken, more than 6.3 million Americans have been ordered from their homes, with police yesterday driving door to door and warning over loudspeaker that anyone who stayed was on their own. Irma will bring sustained wind gusts of more than 157 miles per hour, 252 kilometers per hour, which can easily destroy buildings, rip up roads, topple power lines and cripple infrastructure. Aussies caught up in storm. Australian cafe owner Marliese Lapper yesterday said she and her husband Yuri Imanov had missed out on evacuating because their home on Florida's west coast at Cape Coral was initially not in the forecast impact zone. "We weren't planning to evacuate because there hasn't been an order and the hurricane was going to hit the east coast," she said. "Now it's probably too late for us to leave." Ms. Lapper, who has lived in Florida for 10 years, said she spent yesterday preparing storm shutters and flood-proofing her home and business, Cafe U. "I am just too busy to be scared right now," she said. "But I am sure when we are sitting at home tomorrow with a hurricane battering down on us I will probably get a little nervous." Residents stock up on food, petrol, water. Fuel is scarce as millions clogged highways headed north. Those who didn't try to flee by car filled shelters, set up in schools, churches, even speedways. Supermarkets across the state have been bled dry of non-perishable food and water. At Walmart in Orlando yesterday, there was no water available and entire shelves of tinned food were stripped, leaving only pickled clams and lumpfish caviar behind. "It's been crazy in here the past couple days," said cashier Andrea Franklin, a lifelong Orlando resident. "Usually people here don't pay much attention to hurricanes because they happen a lot. But people were scared by what happened in Houston and so they seem to be taking this one a lot more seriously." The theme park capital of Orlando, in central Florida, is slightly inland so isn't normally too badly battered in hurricane season as the storms lose strength as they travel overland. Yesterday several of the city's famous theme parks closed down and the spires of the Disney Castle were taken down for protection. Floridians told to get out now. At twice the size of the entire state, Irma is so big that Governor Rick Scott said yesterday all Floridians should be prepared to evacuate. Nancy Maldonado said she chose to flee her Edgewood, Miami, home ahead of an evacuation order because she was scared one of the 6 construction cranes nearby could topple. "I haven't been able to sleep for days," said Ms. Maldonado, 36, who headed north to Pompano Beach Friday. "This storm has seemed like it was going to swallow us. But now we are safe in a house with hurricane shutters, so we will ride it out here." For those who chose to stay out the storm, authorities had stark warnings that no emergency services would be available in dozens of mandatory evacuation zones in parts of Miami, Tampa, Fort Lauderdale and along the state's low-lying coastline. They said nobody was safe in the Florida Keys, a string islands to the southwest of the mainland and where first landfall was predicted. "It's not a question of if Florida is going to be impacted, it's a question of how bad Florida is going to be impacted and where the storm ends up," said William Long of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. The FEMA boss said anyone who thought they had lived through other devastating storms such as Andrew in 1992, one of only 2 hurricanes to make landfall as a Category 5 after Camille in 1969, didn't understand Irma's potential. Mr. Long said Irma was a threat that is going to devastate the United States, either Florida or some of the southeastern states, and he warned residents in states from Alabama to North Carolina to be prepared. "I can guarantee you that I don't know anybody in Florida that's ever experienced what's about to hit South Florida," Mr. Long said. First hurricane force gusts hit Keys as Irma nears Florida. Landfall. Irma nears Florida. Landfall. Published September 10, 2017. Fox News. Now playing. Senator Bill Nelson. Tampa Bay could face serious destruction. Close. The first hurricane-force wind gust has been recorded in the Florida Keys, the National Weather Service said late Saturday night, according to the Associated Press. The Weather Service said the Smith Shoal Light Station recorded a 74 miles per hour wind gust on Saturday night, the AP reported. Meanwhile, the center of Irma was headed toward the Keys with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. The edge of Hurricane Irma kicked up surf, whipped up palm trees and spun up at least one confirmed tornado as it approached landfall in Florida Saturday evening. Irma had been downgraded to a Category 3 storm as it raked the coast of Cuba Saturday morning, but it was expected to get its strength back over the ultra-toasty Florida Straits and hit the peninsula Sunday morning as a dangerous Category 4 storm. "This is your last chance to make a good decision," Governor Rick Scott warned residents in Florida's evacuation zones, which encompassed a staggering 6.4 million people, or more than 1 in 4 people in the state. As of 11 p.m. ET Saturday, the National Hurricane Center, NHC, placed Irma about 90 miles southeast of Key West with winds of up to 120 miles per hour. The center said the storm was moving west-northwest at 6 miles per hour and warned of heavy squalls with embedded tornadoes sweeping across South Florida. The National Weather Service in Miami posted on Twitter on Saturday evening that a tornado had touched the ground in the Fort Lauderdale suburb of Oakland Park. It wasn't immediately clear how much damage was caused. Tornado warnings have been issued for Fort Lauderdale, Coral Springs, Pompano Beach in Sunrise and Broward County, as well as parts of nearby Palm Beach and Hendry counties. More than 75,000 people had lost power by Saturday evening, mostly in and around Miami and Fort Lauderdale, as the wind began gusting. For days, the forecast had made it look as if the Miami metropolitan area of 6 million people on Florida's Atlantic coast could get hit head-on by the long-dreaded big one. But that soon changed. Meteorologists predicted Irma's center would blow ashore Sunday morning in the perilously low-lying Florida Keys, then hug the state's west coast, plowing into the Tampa Bay area by Monday morning. Still, Miami was not out of danger. Because the storm is 350 to 400 miles wide, the metro area could still get life-threatening hurricane winds and dangerous storm surge of 4 to 6 feet, forecasters warned. The new course threatens everything from Tampa Bay's bustling twin cities of Tampa and St. Petersburg to Naples' mansion and yacht-lined canals, Sun City Center's retirement homes, and Sanibel Island's shell-filled beaches. By late morning Saturday, however, few businesses in St. Petersburg and its barrier islands had put plywood or hurricane shutters on their windows, and some locals grumbled about the change in the forecast. For 5 days, we were told it was going to be on the East Coast, and then 24 hours before it hits, we're now told it's coming up the West Coast, said Jeff Bierbaum, a 52-year-old entrepreneur in St. Petersburg. As usual, the weatherman, I don't know why they're paid. With the new forecast, Pinellas County, home to St. Petersburg, ordered 260,000 people to leave, while Georgia scaled back evacuation orders for some coastal residents. Tampa has not been struck by a major hurricane since 1921, when its population was about 10,000, National Hurricane Center spokesman Dennis Felgen said. Now the area has around 3 million people. Nearly the entire Florida coastline remained under hurricane watches and warnings, and Larry residents watched a projected track that could still shift to Spare, or Savage, parts of the state. Forecasters warned of storm surge as high as 15 feet. This is going to sneak up on people, said Jamie Rome, head of the Hurricane Center's Storm Surge Unit. About 70,000 people crowded into 385 shelters across Florida. In Key West, 60-year-old Carol Walterson Stroud sought refuge in a senior center with her husband, granddaughter and dog. The streets were nearly empty, shops were boarded up and the wind started to blow. "Tonight, I'm sweating," she said. "Tonight, I'm scared to death." At Germain Arena not far from Fort Myers, on Florida's southwestern corner, thousands waited in a snaking line for hours to gain a spot in the hockey venue turned shelter. "We'll never get in," Jamila Bartley lamented as she stood in the parking lot. The governor activated all 7,000 members of the Florida National Guard, and 30,000 guardsmen from elsewhere were on standby. In the Orlando area, Walt Disney World, Universal Studios and SeaWorld all prepared to close Saturday. The Miami, Fort Lauderdale and Orlando airports shut down, and the Tampa airport planned to do the same later in the day. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge spanning Tampa Bay was closed. Given its mammoth size and strength and its projected course, it could prove one of the most devastating hurricanes ever to hit Florida and inflict damage on a scale not seen here in 25 years. Hurricane Andrew razed Miami's suburbs in 1992 with winds topping 165 miles per hour, 265 kilometers per hour, damaging or blowing apart over 125,000 homes. The damage in Florida totaled $26 billion, and at least 40 people died. Boat captain Ray Scarborough and his girlfriend left their home in Big Pine Key and fled north to stay with relatives in Orlando. Scarborough was 12 when Andrew hit and remembers lying on the floor in a hall as the storm nearly ripped the roof off his house. "They said this one is going to be bigger than Andrew. When they told me that," he said, "that's all I needed to hear." First hurricane-strength winds hit Florida as Irma closes in. The National Weather Service says the first hurricane-force wind gust has been recorded in the Florida Keys as Irma inches closer to the state. The Weather Service says the Smith Shoal Light Station recorded a 74 miles per hour wind gust on Saturday night. The center of Irma is headed toward the Keys and has sustained winds of 120 miles per hour.